Having reconciled with his cousin brother, Vytautas began the great work of subjugation of the lands to the east of Lithuania. He had a serious competitor in this field, Prince of Moscow Vasily, who was also his son-in-law. The main dispute was over taking control of two rich and independent merchant republics, Pskov and Wielki Novgorod. In the latter city, Vytautas managed to settle Jagiello's brother, Duke Lingvinis. It resulted in a war between Moscow and supported by Lithuanian Novgorod. In 1398, on the Isle of Salines, Vytautas conferred with Grand Master of the Teutonic Order Konrad von Jungingen, where the Duke ceded Samogitia to the order. Thus, being safe from the west, he could get ready for a great expedition against the Tatars. He entered into an agreement with Khan Toktamish, expelled from the Golden Horde by the great conqueror Timur. The Pope favored the expedition and even proclaimed a crusade. Thanks to it, in 1399, the Lithuanian Duke gathered a huge army in Kiev. From there, they set out crossing the rivers Dnieper, Zimna-Woda, Tsel and Sula. On the 12th of August, they reached the Vorskla River, where the Crusaders were stopped by Tatar troops under the command of Edigay. A battle ensued in which Vytautas' army suffered a terrible defeat, thus weakening his position in the east for a long time. Barely a quarter of the knights returned home. Impressed by the defeat at the Vorskla River, Lithuania and Poland brought together again. It resulted in a Union of Vilnius, signed on the 18th of January 1401. Thanks to it, Vytautas was finally granted the desired title of Grand Duke of Lithuania. On the other hand, Jagiello reserved for himself the title of Supreme Duke. Under the Treaty of Salinas, the Teutonic Knights started the absolute conversion of Samogitians. They, however, fled en masse to Lithuania to be provided shelter by their relatives and friends. The Grand Duke initially gave the fugitives up to the Teutonic Knights. After some time, he changed his mind and began to instigate Samogitians to rebellion. Already then, both Vytautas and King Jagiello planned confrontation with the order and attempted to find some pretext for it. Samogitia was just a pretext. In the presence of such an attitude of Vytautas, the Teutonic Knights started to prepare for war against Lithuania. They were only interested whether the King of Poland was going to come to the help of his cousin. Together with the Crown Council, Jagiello was determined to do so. However, wanting to provoke the order, in 1409 he sent to Malbork a legation led by a blunt speaker, Archbishop Mikołaj Kurowski. Grand Duke of Lithuania Vytautas, although a great duke, is still a subject of the Kingdom of Poland. For this reason, the king mustn't leave him in the war. However, the king proposes to refrain from any war and call a meeting where all harm and injustice should be corrected. I can't stand any longer the harm done to me and to the order, but right now, with the whole army, I'm going to Lithuania. Stop scaring us with the Lithuanian war, Grandmaster. For if you set out to Lithuania, be sure the king will visit Prussia with his army. We regard the enemies of Lithuania as the enemies of ours. Thus, we will turn our swords on you if you attack Lithuania. Thank you, very most reverend father. You didn't hide your king's intentions before me. I, explained in short by your speech, shall rather blow my strike to the head itself than to the members. I do prefer to visit a settled land to an empty one, cities and estates to forests, and the planned war with Lithuania against the Polish kingdom shall I turn. The provocation of Jagiello and Vytautas had its intended effect. On the 6th of August 1409, Grandmaster Julik von Jungingen officially declared war on Jagiello. Shortly thereafter, the Teutonic Knights attacked Dobrzyn Land, Kujawia and Kraina. They also conducted a raid to northwest Greater Poland. They managed to capture Bydgoszcz, but soon the town was retaken by the Poles. The hostilities ended in a truce, which was to be enforced until the sunset of 24th of June 1410. Until then, both parties had been preparing intensively for the final settlement. Polish-Lithuanian military campaign was planned at the meeting in Brest-Litovsk in December 1409. Only 3 people took part in the talks: King Władysław Jagiello, Grand Duke Vytautas, and Deputy Chancellor of the Crown Mikołaj Trąba. Using a map, they decided to conduct a daring raid on the Order's capital Malbork and appointed the place and time of concentration of troops. Czerwings upon the Vistula River, where they planned to meet at the end of June. They also decided on building a floating bridge to move the united armies across the river. The marching route of Grand Duke's army to the place of concentration of troops under Czerwings is not well known. We can only reconstruct it with a high probability. It's known that from the 16th to the 28th of May, Vytautas was still in his castle in Trakai, where he received Hungarian deputies. Meanwhile, both military camps and cannons had already left Trakai, heading for the appointed place of concentration. The Duke himself set out at the head of the army on the 3rd of June. Vytautas advanced up to the east bank of the Neman in the direction of Grodno, where he crossed the river. Then he turned west and disappeared in the woods, which he left only by the Narew River. Here, before the 14th of June, had he joined the rest of his army, that is Ruthenian and Tatar auxiliary troops. After a few days of camping, they set out up the west bank of the Narew in a westerly direction to cross the Bug River between the 24th and the 28th of June. A day later, Vytautas' army came into operating contact with the Polish troops stationed in Kozłowo. On the 30th of June, Grand Duke, together with all his power, reached Czerwings, where he was already awaited by his cousin, the Polish king Jagiello. The armies of Poland, of Lithuania and the troops of Dukes of Mazovia made a model crossing of the Vistula River under the watchful eye of the king, and soon on the 3rd of July they set out towards the state of the Teutonic Order. The speed and efficiency of crossing the river surprised the Grand Master, who was staying in Toruń and who could not believe that Jagiello, at the forefront of his power, was already a step away from the borders of his country. Nevertheless, he still was unable to fully predict the intentions of the king and did not assume that the latter was going to strike deep in the lands of the Order. Having crossed the Vistula River, the Polish army advanced rapidly to Prussia, where between the 7th and the 9th of July they appeared on the Kra land, which belonged to the Mazovia and was mortgaged to the Teutonic Knights. For this reason, Lithuanians and Tatars plundered it mercilessly. It didn't go without atrocities and murders of civilians. On the 9th of July, the Polish-Lithuanian army finally marched into Prussia. To celebrate this event, the whole army unfurled flags and the knights sang Bogorodzica. The Grand Master was already certain that Jagiello was heading for Malbork in the direction of Korzętnik along the Well River, where he would want to ford the Dręca. Indeed, on the 11th of July, Jagiello camped on the Rybkowo lake near the Korzętnik castle. A ride, sent by the knight, seized the Teutonic horses while they were bathing in the river. This shows that altogether the arrival of the enemy army had been expected. The marching speed of the Polish-Lithuanian troops surprised the Teutonic Knights.